Of course, the book we're honoring this weekend is American Gods, so it is my great pleasure to welcome one of our own modern gods, a writer of unmatched imagination and talent, Neil Gaiman.
How visible am I?
You look great.
Right. Hang on. Right. It's very kind of you, Tom. So, reading. And normally at readings, there are lots and lots of things that I have to worry about. Oh, shall I read this or shall I read that? I figure in this place, at this time, there is only one reading that I can do. So, we're in the middle of Chapter 5 of American Gods. Snow spun through their headlights and into the windshield as they drove through the darkness. The effect was almost hypnotic. "This is the only country in the world," said Wednesday into the stillness, "that worries about what it is." What? The rest of them know what they are. No one ever needs to go searching for the heart of Norway or looks for the soul of Mozambique. They know what they are. And, just thinking out loud, so you've been to lots of other countries then? Wednesday said nothing. Shadow glanced at him. "No," said Wednesday with a sigh. "No, I never have." They stopped for gas, and Wednesday went into the restroom in his security guard jacket and his suitcase and came out in a crisp, pale suit, brown shoes, and a knee-length brown coat that looked like it might be Italian. "So, when we get to Madison, what then?" "Take Highway 14 west to Spring Green. We'll be meeting everyone at a place called the House on the Rock. You been there?" "No," said Shadow, "but I've seen the signs." The signs for the House on the Rock were all around that part of the world. Oblique, ambiguous signs all across Illinois and Minnesota and Wisconsin, probably as far away as Iowa, Shadow suspected. Signs alerting you to the existence of the House on the Rock. Shadow had seen the signs and wondered about them. Did the house balance perilously upon the rock? What was so interesting about the rock? About the house? He'd given it a passing thought, but then forgotten it. Shadow was not in the habit of visiting roadside attractions. They drove past the Capitol Dome of Madison, another perfect snow globe scene in the falling snow. And then they were off the interstate and driving down country roads. After almost an hour of driving through towns with names like Black Earth, they turned down a narrow driveway past several enormous snow-dusted flower pots entwined with lizard-like dragons. The tree-lined parking lot was almost empty. "They'll be closing soon," said Wednesday. "So what is this place?" asked Shadow, as they walked through the parking lot toward a low, unimpressive wooden building. "This is a roadside attraction. said Wednesday. One of the finest, which means it is a place of power. Come again? It's perfectly simple, said Wednesday. In other countries over the years, people recognize the places of power. Sometimes it would be a natural formation. Sometimes it would just be a place that was somehow special. They knew that something important was happening there, that there was some focusing point, some channel, some window to the immanent. And so they build temples or cathedrals or erect stone circles or... Well, you get the idea. There are churches all across the States, though, said Shadow. In every town, sometimes on every block. And about as significant in this context as dentists' offices. No, in the USA, people still get the call, or some of them, and they feel themselves being called to from the transcendent void, and they respond to it by building a model out of beer bottles of somewhere they've never visited. Or by erecting a giant bat house in some part of the country that bats have traditionally declined to visit. Roadside attractions. People feel themselves being pulled to places where, in other parts of the world, they've recognized that part of themselves that is truly transcendent. And they buy a hot dog and walk around feeling satisfied on a level they cannot truly describe and profoundly dissatisfied on a level beneath that. You have some pretty whacked out theories, said Shadow. Nothing theoretical about it, young man, said Wednesday. You should have figured that out by now. There was only one ticket window open. We stopped selling tickets in half an hour, said the girl. It takes at least 2 hours to walk around, you see. Wednesday paid for their tickets in cash. Where's the rock? Asked Shadow. Under the house. Where's the house? Wednesday put his finger to his lips and they walked forward. Further in, a player piano was playing something that was intended to have been Ravel's Bolero. The place seemed to be a geometrically reconfigured 1960s bachelor band, with open stonework, pile carpeting, and magnificently ugly mushroom-shaped stained glass lampshades. Up a winding staircase to another room filled with knickknacks. They say this was built by Frank Lloyd Wright's evil twin, said Wednesday. Frank Lloyd wrong. He chuckled at his joke. I saw that on a t-shirt, said Shadow. Up and down more stairs, and now they were in a long, long room made of glass that protruded needle-like out over the leafless black and white countryside, hundreds of feet below them. Shadow stood and watched the snow tumble and spin. So this is the house on the rock? He asked, puzzled. More or less. This is the infinity room, part of the actual house, although a late edition. But no, my young friend, we have not scratched the tiniest surface of what the house has to offer. So, according to your theory, said Shadow, Walt Disney World would be the holiest place in America. Wednesday frowned and stroked his beard. Walt Disney bought some orange groves in the middle of Florida and built a tourist town on them. No magic there of any kind. Although I think there may be something real in the original Disneyland. There may be some power there, although twisted and hard to access. There's definitely nothing out of the ordinary about Disney World. But some parts of Florida are filled with real magic. You just have to keep your eyes open. Ah, for the mermaids of Wiki Wachi. Follow me, this way. Everywhere was the sound of music. Jangling, awkward music, ever so slightly off the beat and out of time. Wednesday took a $5 bill and put it into a change machine, receiving a handful of brass-colored metal coins in return. He tossed one to Shadow, who caught it and, realizing that a small boy was watching him, held it up between forefinger and thumb and vanished it. The small boy ran over to his mother, who was inspecting one of the ubiquitous Santa Clauses. Over 6,000 on display, the son said. And he tugged urgently at the hem of her coat. Shadow followed Wednesday outside briefly, and then followed the signs to the streets of yesterday. 40 years ago, Alex Jordan, his face is on the token you have palmed in your right hand, Shadow, began to build a house on a high jut of rock in a field he did not own, and even he could not have told you why. And people came to see him build it, the curious and the puzzled, and those who had neither, and those who could not honestly have told you why they came. So he did what any sensible American male of his generation would do. He began to charge them money. Nothing much, a nickel each perhaps, or a quarter, and he kept building and the people kept coming. So he took those quarters and nickels and made something even bigger and stranger. He built these warehouses on the land beneath the house and filled them with things for people to see, and then the people came to see them. Millions of people come here every year. Why? But Wednesday simply smiled, and they walked into the dimly lit, tree-lined streets of yesterday. Prim-lipped Victorian china dolls stared in profusion through dusty store windows, like so many props from respectable horror films. Cobblestones under their feet, the darkness of a roof above their heads, jangling mechanical music in the background. They passed a glass box of broken puppets, and an overgrown golden music box in a glass case. They passed the dentist and the drugstore. Restore potency, use O'Leary's magical belt. At the end of the street was a large glass box with a female mannequin inside it, dressed as a gypsy fortune teller. Now, boomed Wednesday over the mechanical music, at the start of any quest or enterprise, it behooves us to consult the norns. So let us designate this Sybil our Erd, eh? He dropped the glass-coloured house on the rock coin into the slot. With jagged mechanical motions, the gypsy lifted her arm and lowered it once more. A slip of paper chunked out of the slot. Wednesday took it, read it, wrote it, folded it up, and put it in his pocket. Aren't you going to show it to me? I'll show you mine, said Shadow. A man's fortune is his own affair, said Wednesday stiffly. I would not ask to see yours. Shadow put his own coin in the slot. He took his slip of paper. He read it. Every ending is a new beginning. Your lucky number is none. Your lucky colour is dead. Motto: like father, like son. Shadow made a face. He folded the fortune up and put it in his inside pocket. They went further in, down a red corridor, past rooms filled with empty chairs upon which rested violins and violas and cellos which played themselves, or seemed to, when fed a coin. Keys to press, cymbals crashed, pipes blew compressed air into clarinets and oboes. Shadow observed with a wry amusement that the bows of the stringed instruments, played by mechanical arms, never actually touched the strings, which were often loose or missing. He wondered whether all the sounds he heard were made by wind and percussion, or whether there were tapes as well. They'd walked for what felt like several miles when they came to a room called the Mikado, one wall of which was a 19th century pseudo-oriental nightmare, in which beetle-browed mechanical drummers banged cymbals and drums while staring out from their dragon-encrusted lair. Currently, they were majestically torturing Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre. Chernobog sat on a bench in the wall facing the Mikado machine, tapping out the time with his fingers. Pipes fluted, bells jangled. Wednesday sat next to him. Shadow decided to remain standing. Chernobog extended his left hand, shook Wednesday's, shook Shadow's. Well met, he said. Then he sat back, apparently enjoying the music. The Danse Macabre came to a tempestuous and discordant end. That all the artificial instruments were ever so slightly out of tune, added to the otherworldliness of the place. A new piece began. How was your bank robbery? Asked Chernobog. It went well? He stood, reluctant to leave the Mikado and its thundering, jangling music. Slick as a snake in a barrel of butter, said Wednesday. I get the pension from the slaughterhouse, said Chernobog. I do not ask for more. It won't last forever, said Wednesday. Nothing does. More corridors, more musical machines. Shadow became aware that they were not following the path through the rooms intended for tourists, but seemed to be following a different route of Wednesday's own devising. They were going down a slope, and Shadow, confused, wondered if they'd already been that way. Chernobog grasped Shadow's arm. Quickly, come here. he said, pulling him over to a large glass box by a wall. It contained a diorama of a tramp asleep in a churchyard in front of a church door. The Drunkard's Dream, said the label, which explained that it was a 19th century penny in the slot machine originally from an English railway station. The coin slot had been modified to take the brass house on the rock coins. Put in the money, said Chernobog. Why? Asked Shadow. You must see. I show you. Shadow inserted his coin. The drunk in the graveyard raised his bottle to his lips. One of the gravestones flipped over, revealing a grasping corpse, a headstone turned around, flowers replaced by a grinning skull. A wraith appeared on the right of the church, while on the left of the church something with a half-glimpsed, pointed, unsettlingly bird-like face, a pale Boschian nightmare, glided smoothly from a headstone into the shadows and was gone. When the church door opened, a priest came out, and the ghosts, haunts, and corpses vanished, and only the priest and the drunk were left alone in the graveyard. The priest looked down at the drunk disdainfully, and backed through the open door, which closed behind him, leaving the drunk on his own. The clockwork story was deeply unsettling. Much more unsettling, thought Shadow, than clockwork has any right to be. You know why I show that to you? Asked Chernobog. No. That is the world as it is. That is the real world. It is there, in that box. They wandered through a blood-coloured room filled with old theatrical organs, huge organ pipes, and what appeared to be enormous copper brewing vats liberated from a brewery. Where are we going? Asked Shadow. The carousel, said Chernobog. But we've passed signs to the carousel a dozen times already. He goes his way. We travel a spiral. The quickest way is sometimes the longest. Shadow's feet were beginning to hurt, and he found this sentiment to be extremely unlikely. A mechanical machine played Octopus's Garden in a room that went up for many stories, the centre of which was filled entirely with a replica of a great black whale-like beast with a life-size replica of a boat in its vast fiberglass mouth. They passed on from there to a travel hall where they saw the car covered with tiles and the functioning Rube Goldberg chicken device and the rusting Burma shave ads on the wall. Life is hard, it's toil and trouble. Keep your jawline free from stubble. Burma shave. Read on, and he undertook to overtake. The road was on a bend. From now on, the undertaker is his only friend, Burma shave. And they were at the bottom of a ramp now, with an ice cream shop in front of them. It was nominally open, but the girl washing down the services had a closed look on her face. So they walked past it into the pizzeria cafeteria, empty for an elderly black man wearing a bright check suit and canary yellow gloves. He was a small man, the kind of little old man who looked as if the passing of the years had shrunk him, eating an enormous, many-scooped ice cream sundae, drinking a supersized mug of coffee. A black cigarillo was burning in the ashtray in front of him. 3 coffees, said Wednesday to Shadow. He went to the restaurant. Shadow bought the coffees and took them over to Chernobog, who was sitting with the old black man and was smoking a cigarette surreptitiously as if he was scared of being caught. The other man, happily toying with his sundae, mostly ignored his cigarillo, but as Shadow approached, he picked it up, inhaled deeply, and blew 2 smoke rings. First one large one, then another smaller one, which passed neatly through the first, and he grinned as if he were astonishingly pleased with himself. Shadow, this is Mr. Nancy, said Chernobog. The old man got to his feet and thrust out his yellow-gloved right hand. Good to meet you, he said with a dazzling smile. I know who you must be. You're working for the old one-eyed bastard, aren't you? There was a faint twang in his voice, a hint of a patois that might have been West Indian. I work for Mr. Wednesday, said Shadow. Yes. Please sit down. Chernobog inhaled on his cigarette. I think, he pronounced gloomily, the dark kind. We like the cigarettes so much because they remind us of the offerings that once they burned for us, the smoke rising up as they sought our approval or our favor. They never gave me nothing like that, said Nancy. Best I could hope for was a pile of fruit to eat, maybe curry goat, something slow and cold and tall to drink, and a big old high-titty woman to keep me company. He grinned white teeth and winked at Shadow. These days, said Chernobog, his expression unchanged, we have nothing. Well, I don't get anywhere near as much fruit as I used to, said Mr. Nancy, his eyes shining, but there still ain't nothing out there in the world for my money that can beat a big old high-titty woman. Some folk you talk to, they say it's the booty you got to inspect at first, but I'm here to tell you it's the titties that crack my engine on a cold morning. Nancy began to laugh, a wheezing, rattling, good-natured laugh, and Shadow found himself liking the old man despite himself. Wednesday returned from the restroom and shook hands with Nancy. Shadow, you want something to eat? A slice of pizza or a sandwich? I'm not hungry, said Shadow. Let me tell you something, said Mr. Nancy. It can be a long time between meals. Someone offers you food, you say yes. I'm no longer young as I was, but I can tell you this, you never say no to the opportunity to piss, to eat, or get half an hour shut eye. You follow me? Yes, but I'm really not hungry. You're a big one, said Nancy, staring into Shadow's light grey eyes, with his old eyes the color of mahogany. Tall drink of water. But I gotta tell you, you don't look too bright. I got a son. Stupid as a man who bought his stupid as a 2-for-1 sale, and you remind me of him. If you don't mind, I'll take that as a compliment, said Shadow. Being called dumb as a man who slept late the morning they handed out brains. Being compared to a member of your family. Mr. Nancy snubbed out his cigarette. Then he flicked an imaginary speck of ash off of his yellow gloves. You may not be the worst choice, old one, I could have made, come to that. He looked up at Wednesday. You got any idea how many of us there's going to be here tonight? I sent the message out to everyone I could find, said Wednesday. Obviously not everyone's going to be able to come, and some of them, with a pointed look at Chernobog, might not want to. But I think we can confidently expect several dozen of us, and the word will travel. They made their way past a display of suits of armor. Victorian fake, pronounced Wednesday as they passed the lasting display. Modern fake, 12th century helm on a 17th century reproduction, 15th century left gauntlet. And then Wednesday pushed through an exit door, circled them around the outside of the building. I can't be doing with all these in and outs, said Nancy. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I come from warmer climes. Along a covered walkway, in through another exit door, and they were in the carousel room. Calliope music played, a Strauss waltz, stirring, and occasionally discordant. The wall as they entered was hung with antique carousel horses, hundreds of them, some in need of a lick of paint, others in need of a good dusting. Above them hung dozens of winged angels, constructed rather obviously from female store window mannequins. Some of them bared their sexless breasts. Some had lost their wigs and stared boldly and blindly down from the darkness. And then there was the carousel. A sign proclaimed it was the largest in the world. Said how much it weighed, how many thousand light bulbs to be found in the chandeliers that hung from it in Gothic profusion, and forbade anyone from climbing on it or from riding on the animals. And such animals! Shadow stared, impressed in spite of himself, at the hundreds of full-size creatures who circled on the planet of the platform of the carousel. Real creatures, imaginary creatures, and transformations of the two. Each creature was different. He saw mermaids and merman, centaur and unicorn, elephants, one huge, one tiny, bulldog, frog and phoenix, zebra, tiger, manticore and basilisk, swans pulling a carriage, a white ox, a fox, twin walruses, even a sea serpent, all of them brightly coloured and more than real. Each rode the platform as the waltz came to an end and a new waltz began. The carousel did not even slow down. What's it for? asked Shadow. I mean, okay, world's biggest, hundreds of animals, thousands of light bulbs, and it goes around all the time, and no one ever rides it. It's not there to be ridden, not by people, said Wednesday. It's there to be admired. It's there to be. Like a prayer wheel going round and round, said Mr. Nancy, accumulating power. So, where are we meeting everyone? Asked Shadow. I thought you said we were meeting them here, but the place is empty. Wednesday grinned his scary grin. Shadow, he said, you're asking too many questions. You're paid not to ask questions. Sorry. Now stand over here and help us up, said Wednesday, and he walked over to the platform on one side with a description of the carousel on it and a warning that the carousel was not to be ridden. Shadow thought of saying something, but instead he helped them one by one up onto the ledge. Wednesday seemed profoundly heavy. Jannabog climbed up himself, only using Shadow's shoulder to steady himself. Nancy seemed to weigh nothing at all. Each of the old men climbed out onto the ledge, and then with a skip and a hop, they walked out onto the circling carousel platform. Well, barked Wednesday, aren't you coming? Shadow, not without a certain amount of hesitation, and a hasty look around for any House on the Rock personnel who might be watching, swung himself up onto the ledge beside the world's largest carousel. Shadow was puzzled to realize that he was far more concerned with breaking the rules by climbing onto the carousel than he had been aiding and abetting this afternoon's bank robbery. Each of the old men selected a mount. Wednesday climbed onto a wolf. Jannabog climbed onto an armored centaur, its face hidden by a metal helmet. Nancy, chuckling, slithered up onto the back of an enormous leaping lion, captured by the sculptor mid-roar. He patted the side of the lion. The Strauss waltz carried them around, majestically. Wednesday was smiling, and Nancy was laughing delightedly, an old man's cackle, and even the dour Jannabog seemed to be enjoying himself. Shadow felt as if a weight was suddenly lifted from his back. 3 old men were enjoying themselves, riding the world's biggest carousel. So what if they did get thrown out of the place? Wasn't it worth anything to say that you had ridden on the world's biggest carousel? Wasn't it worth it to have travelled on one of these glorious monsters? Shadow inspected a bulldog and a mer creature and an elephant with a golden howdah. And he climbed onto the back of a creature with an eagle's head and the body of a tiger and held on tight. The rhythm of the Blue Danube waltz rippled and rang and sang in his head. The lights of 1,000 chandeliers glinted and prismed, and for a heartbeat, Shadow was a child again, and all it took to make him happy was to ride the carousel. He stayed perfectly still, riding his eagle tiger at the center of everything, and the world revolved around him. Shadow heard himself laugh over the sound of the music. He was happy. It was as if the last 36 hours had never happened, as if the last 3 years had not happened, as if his life had evaporated into the daydream of a small child riding the carousel in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco on his first trip back to the States. A marathon journey by ship and by car, his mother standing there watching him proudly, and himself sucking his melting popsicle, holding on tightly, hoping that the music would never stop, the carousel would never slow, the ride would never end. He was going around and around and around again. Then the lights went out, and Shadow saw the gods.